Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of the Scruffy Movies Podcast. Thank you for joining us again. I am once again Zach Wallace.
And I am John Crocker.
And today we're going to be talking about Star Wars.
Personal favorite.
Just a little bit of Star Wars. Both of our personal favorites. One of the reasons why we're a lot more than just co-workers now is because of Star Wars. And so we thought it would just be an interesting episode to kind of go back and forth and see what we had to talk about.
And it is also worth mentioning that as much as possible, we would like to focus this particular episode on the original trilogy. Mm-hmm. I highly doubt we're going to make it very far without at least referencing either the prequels or the new movies. But the hope is that this will center around the original trilogy. And in the future, as other episodes start to come out, we'll be covering the prequels, the new movies, and certainly any new additions to the Star Wars universe that drop over the coming years.
Yeah, of course. This episode is all kind of a setup because we have a much more interesting episode. That's a weird way to preface this episode, but a much more interesting one is coming next week about all the new Star Wars movies because we have some interesting and very different opinions on those.
But it's important to set that baseline first. And there's no better way than to go back to what might very well be the holy grail of movies, at least in my opinion, with the original trilogy.
I can agree partly with that. There's franchises I like more, but I love Star Wars.
Yeah.
But I love Star Wars.
So where do we begin?
Well, I have a question for you, and it's a very simple question, one that's going to kick off this entire conversation. What is the best movie of the original Star Wars trilogy, and why?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I'm either between A New Hope or Empire. Probably A New Hope, just because that's the one that I wore out.
Yeah.
Like that's the one.
The original.
That's the original. It's what I always go back to. Empire, I liked that it got into more of the depth. And, obviously you've got Yoda and you see more of the world and all this, all that, more of the universe. And then Return of the Jedi it was great, but it was almost, I don't want to say too campy a little bit to be like my favorite, but it was just a little too hokey. Mm-hmm. So I would say that out of the three, A New Hope first, Empire 2, Return of the Jedi 3. How about you?
I was going to let you finish your thought because mine is almost the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah, it goes 6-5-4.
Wow.
I mean, I love the original Star Wars, but there was just something about, and I know a lot of people don't like them. That was actually another question I'd written down before we came in here of what your thoughts were on the Ewoks, because I actually love the Ewoks, and I think it's just super cool that a bunch of more or less teddy bears took down a galactic empire, and I just always thought that was a super interesting point to make.
Okay, so let me preface this by saying, after watching the newer Star Wars movies and going back and rewatching the original trilogy, I was almost more forgiving for a lot of the decisions that were made in the prequels after I watched Episode 6 again. Because to me, a lot of the hate that was given to Jar Jar and Boss Nass and all of those guys, I could almost parallel that to the Ewoks. Where it's sort of...
I can agree with that. I feel like Jar Jar's more than the Ewoks got, because I feel like people are kind of more empathetic towards the Ewoks now.
Right.
They're like, eh. And also, Jar Jar Binks didn't get 2 direct-to-TV movies or whatever those 2 Ewok movies were.
Oh, I know. Were those the Christmas specials?
No, there was one holiday special, and then there was 2 different Ewok movies.
That everyone wants you to just forget existed?
Yeah, it was like the Ewok Adventure. Those are the 3 Star Wars feature-length specials that people are like, let's just focus on the new stuff, huh?
Yeah.
Let's not go back to that holiday special.
But yeah, it was something about... I mean, obviously, cartoonish is not the right word for it, but I felt very similar to the Ewoks as I did. Gosh, what was the race? What's Jar Jar?
Gungan.
A Gungan. I felt like there was a lot of similarities there, And even like, what was it, the speeder bikes in episode number 6? Like, that just seemed completely and totally out of the prequels to me as well. Sort of the second time I'll run around and watched it. Not the second time, the 100th time. So yeah, that would be my sort of opinion on that, I guess.
It's just like the 4th movie. Don't get me wrong. By me saying that it is not my favorite Star Wars movie is like me saying it's my favorite of anything else.
Right.
So it's not that I dislike these things by saying that it's my least favorite. But 4, I just feel like, and it's probably because I watched that one the most when I was a kid, it's gotten to that point of like, okay, I've seen it's Star Wars, got it. Like it's not like boring, but it's to that point of like, I know that this is a level playing field. I know what's coming. I know where to call stuff. Like, I know everything that I could possibly know about it. And for that reason, it's made it a little less interesting as I've grown up, as opposed to the sequels, which I haven't seen as much of.
And, you know, I think a lot of that, too, I experienced some of those same thoughts, even as I was sitting down trying to just collect my thoughts for recording this episode of the podcast, is especially with the original trilogy, you just sort of accept it for what it is. And it is held in such high regard that you are willing to be a bit more forgiving. But what are some of the elements that maybe put A New Hope at the bottom for you? Could it be that, I know a popular thing folks often reference is like the lack of camera movement, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. Everything was like tripoded up, single big wide shots, which really added to the flavor for sure. And we're actually seeing a lot of that come back around with like the intro for, episode, what was it, 7 was huge, and I love that. What was it, more from like a movie production standpoint, or was it the fact that it was such a slow burn, which is, I know when you're introducing new people to Star Wars and you start with A New Hope, if they expect a massive action movie, they're sorely disappointed. Like, does it come from that?
Yeah. No, it really comes from the fact, and I think that the way Hollywood changed after Star Wars has something to do with this, because I was born in 1992. So I was 20 years out from Star Wars.
Right.
Like, I was, like, Star Wars had come out, and everyone had been like, that's the story. That's the hero meets a guide. Like, they do this, they go on this adventure.
Hero's journey.
Exactly. So every movie after that, I've kind of caught on to that. So when I watched Star Wars, because I didn't really watch Star Wars when I was growing up, I saw the prequels first before I saw anything, which is interesting.
Yes, it is.
And we'll talk about that. But it was the rest of Hollywood that's kind of made me, because when I saw Star Wars, I was like, oh, got it. Like, I just already knew. Like, right. I was like, done, got it.
So do you think you were tainted by what movies were at the time when you originally sat down and watched A New Hope? Is that really sort of the root of it for you? Is that it was not up to current production standards? Which I guess, I don't know when it was.
Like, yeah, that wasn't really the issue. But the main issue I had with it was, I guess we'll talk about this now, because this is kind of the reason why. Whenever Star Wars Episode 1 was coming out, everyone was hyped up about it.
Yep.
I had never seen any Star Wars, but I was hyped. I had coloring books. I had like stickers.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I was hyped up for it, and I hadn't seen anything before. Watched it, liked the lightsaber battles, but had no idea what was going on. So I was like, well, maybe they'll fix it with 2. Went to the theater, see 2, fell asleep. Didn't like it. So I was like, oh, I guess all Star Wars movies are like this. But I was like, let me give it a shot. So I rented 4, 5, and 6 from a local video store in my hometown. Had no idea what order they went in, because he had like the original VHS releases that was just like The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Star Wars.
Yeah.
So I had no idea. So I watched Star Wars, went straight to Return of the Jedi, and I was like, this is so weird. I don't understand this movie at all. I was like, they left Han Solo. He was just flying around the Millennium Falcon. What do you mean he's frozen in carbonite? This is ridiculous. So I more or less became a huge Star Trek fan. Yeah. I was a Trekkie for a long time. And I was popping my mouth off at one of my buddies. And I was like, Star Wars will never be Star Trek. You think Star Wars is Star Trek, but it's not. Star Trek's the original, the best. Star Wars is nothing. And he was like, when's the last time you saw those movies? And I was like, I'd never seen the first trilogy. And he's like, okay then. And so he like gave me his box set, and he's like, just go home and watch that. And I was like, okay. And then I think I marathoned it in one night, and I was like, shit. I'm a Star Wars fan.
I get it now.
I like Star Wars more than Star Trek.
So I actually grew up in a household where I'm 3 years older than you. Both of us were the definition of the prime demographic that Episode 1 was marketed to. Mm-hmm. Like, I had all the toys as well. Burger King, you know, you got it with your Happy Meal.
Jar Jar Binks alarm clock.
Oh yeah,
I had a Jar Jar Binks alarm clock. I was that deep.
Every Lego set. But I was lucky enough to have seen the original trilogy going into it. But it is interesting that you bring up Star Trek as well, because I'm also a huge fan of of the series.
I still love Star Trek.
Oh, me too.
But Star Wars just kind of has eclipsed it now.
Believe it or not, as my stepfather is such a huge fan of Star Trek that every year at Christmas we have our normal Christmas tree and then a Christmas tree that is dedicated to only having Star Trek limited edition ornaments. And he has collected so many over the years.
That is pretty cool.
It fills up its own tree. So this is, to say this is a battle I fought in my own head my entire life would be an understatement. I didn't truly appreciate Star Trek, I don't think, until I was a little bit older. But Star Wars certainly, hooked me in from the very beginning.
What cinched the deal for me was the 2009 J.J. Abrams Star Trek. Like, I'd always watched the old Star Trek movies and stuff and been like, oh, neat. But then, that 2009 one really cinched me, and I was like, whoa, I love Star Trek. And then that's when I was popping my mouth off of, Star Trek's so much better. Have you seen the new Star Trek movie? It's awesome. Simon Pegg's in it, and he's hilarious.
Well, a parallel between Star Trek and Star Wars is that you may not necessarily want to start people new people to these series where you think you should. Like I mentioned earlier, someone who'd never seen Star Wars, if you started them with A New Hope and they had an expectation and saw trailers for all the new Star Wars and everything else, they're not going to even know what to do with that movie. I feel very strongly about Star Trek as well. I think the next generation, TNG, is definitely where you want to start people. That series has held up. Yeah, more so than not that the original series hasn't held up.
It has held up.
Well, it has, but you have to have the appetite to enjoy it.
It's like the campy way now. The stories are cool, but the effects are like, all right, that's a dude in a lizard outfit.
Exactly. So anyway, not to derail on Star Trek, because we do want to keep this about Star Wars.
I actually do have a point to make off of your comment you just made. My wife hadn't seen any Star Wars movies when Force Awakens was coming out, and so I was freaking out, and I was like, well, you've got to, I'm gonna see that movie I don't know how many times in the theaters. You've got to catch up because you're coming with me at least once. I can guarantee it.
Did you do 1 through 6, or did you start with the...
She still has not seen 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
So I started with 4, 5, and 6, and she admitted to me later that she appreciated it after the fact, once she had watched all of them, but it was that kind of the story she's already seen before and stuff like that. And so she's like, I kept having to ask you a bunch of questions so that I didn't fall asleep. And the whole time she kept asking me questions, I was like, wow, she's really interested. She loves this movie. It was so that she didn't fall asleep.
She's just trying to impress you, brother.
Yeah. But then but 7 came out, and now she's a bit she loves 7. So she loves all the newer stuff, which is something that we can talk about more next week.
Absolutely. So one thing that I want to ask you about, because this is something that I knew existed, but I never really understood it, I don't guess, is I own digital copies of the original trilogy. Mine are post, I guess the post-production edits they did at some point when things went to digital.
Special edition
where Han shoots first, or doesn't shoot first.
He doesn't shoot first anymore.
And when they show the Force Ghosts, you've got Anakin in there. They redid Palpatine's face to make sure it matched.
Yeah.
And I guess growing up, I just it never dawned on me until I eventually went back and rewatched them, and I was like, wait a second. How in the world did Anakin get in there?
That's the exact same thing I thought with my friend's box set, because he had the special editions. Yep. And I was like, no way they knew Hayden Christensen was going to play Anakin Skywalker. No way that dude looked like he was 20 in 1980 and still looks like he's 20 in 2003.
So what do you think about that? Like, to me, I'm firmly in the camp, and I could probably be persuaded otherwise. But to me, when you release a movie, it's like finishing a painting. When you say that you're done and you give it to the world, that no longer belongs to you, that belongs to the world. And I firmly believe that most artists feel that way.
Yeah.
Now, music is a little bit different with sampling and remixes and things of that nature. But as far as going back to quite possibly the most popular movie franchise of all time and reworking and retweaking things. Now, I don't necessarily care so much that they put the up-to-date Force Ghost in there and, Palpatine's face, things like that. But when you mess with who shot first,
yeah,
what are your thoughts on that as being someone that's so into that side of things?
It's interesting because since those were the first that I watched, I didn't get to witness like the original trilogy in its form it was released until I got them all on VHS. So I have all the original releases on VHS, and I got to watch them that way. But coming out of the gate, I didn't know that like all this stuff wasn't supposed to be there, so it didn't really bother me. But then when they released the Blu-rays, which I also own the Complete Saga Blu-ray, they put even more stuff in, which made me mad because it wasn't the stuff I was used to from like the already done special editions. Like it's one thing that I really hate at the end of Return of the Jedi when Luke is being shocked by Palpatine and he's like, "Help me, Father, help me." And Darth Vader in the original is just silent and looks, and then he picks up Palpatine, throws him off a bridge. Awesome scene. In this new one, he looks at Luke and looks at Palpatine. He goes, "No, no," and like echoes the stupid no at the end of episode 3 that like shakes the room. And so that I really didn't like. But it's almost like it's like a fly's buzzing around your face when you're trying to focus on something. Like I just kind of swat at the fly until the no stops, and then I get refocused on Star Wars.
So now I don't know if I own the special editions or the remastered special editions. Way to go, dude.
Now I've thrown you totally off.
Yeah. Now I have no idea which ones I have. Because I've literally had them forever. That there's no telling. It's probably the older versions. Because I've definitely had copies of these since before the Blu-ray release. Before Blu-ray was a thing.
Okay, yeah. So I think then that you're probably pretty good. The Blu-rays is when they added in like even more stuff. And there's like more monsters and the Mos Eisley Cantina and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you're probably good.
Now
you don't have the no.
Yeah, and there are some scenes that they sprinkle in where like big wide shots of the city and things of that nature where it's just like, okay, that it just looks like it doesn't belong in that film.
Yeah.
And that is probably the thing that when I saw that, I said that doesn't belong.
Yeah. That throws, it's like they have a room full of puppets and then there's like one CGI character, and I'm like, why would you even do that? Why just leave it alone?
Leave it alone.
That looks totally weird. Takes me out of the movie. Leave it alone.
So, you mentioned one thing there that I want to come back to when he throws Palpatine down the hole.
Yeah.
Should that kill someone so powerful? Because we have seen... Now, maybe this is only because I'm tainted by knowing what happens for the rest of the story. And what has happened to other Jedi and whatnot. But to see pretty much anyone that needs to live actually be able to live through virtually anything.
Yeah.
To me, that did not feel like a killing move.
Yeah, I have a lot of interesting theories on this kind of stuff. We're going to go deep nerd in this conversation. So I saw a theory. This came out after Rogue One, which I won't go too deep into that one. But it's basically the theory of the Force is a sentient feeling in the universe. And so when it knows that it needs balance is when it brings these people together to make balance. So, and that's why the stormtroopers miss all their shots in all the movies. It's not that they're terrible soldiers. It's that the Force is making them miss their shots. It's why when Han shoots one time, he kills like 3 dudes. It's not because he's that good of a shot. It's because the Force needs them to escape, and these 3 dudes were getting close. So it's like all this super interesting stuff. So that could be maybe some of that. And like the Skywalkers are always being brought together in every series.
Yep.
Besides the new ones yet. In every series that they're the ones who bring balance. So the Force brings them together. So by Darth Vader turning on Palpatine, it could have been the Force being like, okay, you're out of luck. This is it. And he dies. The other theory is that he just went down this giant tube, couldn't get out, and then it blows up.
Yeah.
So that could have also killed him. Just the explosion. He could have not died from the fall. But then he could have just been stuck in there when it exploded.
Yeah, or that could be what happens if you're on the dark side and you give yourself into the Force.
Yeah, that too, because he was also like, and he was not very powerful at the moment, because we've seen like if you force push something, like that takes it out of you. That's
right.
like strength, but you can't see it. And he was going at Luke for a long time too.
Yeah.
And he's a lot older and grizzled in the original trilogy than he is in the prequels, when we saw him do some really cool stuff with his powers. So that what he did to Luke could have been like, and then Darth Vader throws him down a tube, so he might have just been a grizzled old man by the time he hit the end.
Yeah, I remember when the new movies were coming out and they first showed Snoke, and I was like, oh yeah, that's
Palpatine.
Palpatine.
Everybody knows that's Palpatine.
Everybody knows. Which I don't want
so funny. We'll talk about it next week.
Exactly.
Well, next week's episode is going to be a goodie.
Yes, it is. So, editing after the fact, things of that nature, things that might bug you or annoy you about the original trilogy.
Yes.
I had a very difficult time coming up with very many things that made me take a step back and say, well, that did sort of irk me. You know, that rubbed me the wrong way. That didn't make sense. Mm-hmm. Some of it I loved. Some of it actually did irk me. How about you? Do you have any like standout moments, standout things that...
There's one specific standout moment. And it happens in my favorite of the trilogy, in the very opening battle, when Boba Fett, who was this awesome badass dude in all of Empire, shows up for like a scene in Return of the Jedi and just falls into the Sarlacc pit. And then that's it for Boba Fett. Hated that. Because I love Boba Fett, and I wish they would have given him the credit he deserved. And like, he could have kept going. He should have come back in the new movies. Something. They need to make a Boba Fett spin-off movie. Like, something. He just did nothing. Because somebody shot his jetpack and he fell and screamed on his way down.
Okay,
it was a terrible end to his character.
I said that I don't have many things, but you just brought up a few. So, also at the beginning of Return of the Jedi, there is a scene that bugs me a little bit, and that's the first time you see Luke. Outside of the hologram. When he walks in and he just force chokes the two, like, toad people or whatever they were.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
The guards to Jabba's palace.
Yeah. That just did not seem like a Jedi move to me. Now, I understand that what they probably wanted to do was cement very swiftly at the beginning of that movie that Luke is now a full-blown Force user. He knows what he's doing. He's powerful.
Right.
You know, they're really sort of driving that home. But that just did not seem like a very Jedi move to me, that he just walked up, choke you out, keep walking. You know, when he gets to the Jedi mind tricks, then it's like, oh, that's more my speed. So there's one. And then you brought up bounty hunters. This is where I'm sort of torn, because one thing I like about the original trilogy is that you're introduced to characters who would later become well-known and famous. But at the time, when you're watching the movie, they make no sense at all and have little to no explanation.
Yeah.
The bounty hunters are a prime example of that, especially when there's a few gathered around. There's the other guy that's very popular. I can't remember his name either.
Bosk, I think.
Yeah, sort of the reptilian.
Yeah. That's Bosk or Bot. It's
one of those.
With a B-O.
Yeah. And they're all standing around, and then it's just like, he refers to them as bounty hunters, and he talks to them as a whole, and it's like, why are they just hanging out on the bridge of your ship? Or, you know, like that sort of didn't make any sense to me. Now, I appreciate that in the original trilogy, because it was almost like they did it, if they didn't shine the light on them. They were there, they were semi-important, they became fan favorites, but if they were to have shined the light on them more, then it would have only brought up more questions, and it would have only made you say that, your opinion about him jumping in the Sarlacc pit would have been even worse if they would have actually tried to build him up a little bit for that to be his demise.
Yeah.
And I see, not trying to get ahead, but a lot of what's happening in the new series is that they're shining the light on too many characters that are not being developed.
Yeah.
And it was almost like they tried to accomplish the same goal, but in nowhere near the same manner that they were able to in the originals.
Yeah. I thought something was really funny, just a little thing about the sequel trilogy, as like clearly they set up Captain Phasma to be like the Boba Fett of the new series, and then all anyone cared about was when they're fighting on Maz's home planet, and it's just the dude that's like traitor and like whips his thing out, whips his like big this sounds terrible, whips his like the electronic baton basically, and like fights Finn. Everyone was like, oh yeah, that guy. And they even they made up a name for him. They called him like TR8R or something. So it was Traitor. They loved that dude to the point where Lucasfilm developed a character for him, developed a backstory of how he knew Finn, and released it in like books and like all this stuff. Like connected it together because people were freaking out about that dude. And everyone was like, he's Captain Phasma. Who cares?
So my question is, if the Jedi have been dead and gone and not seen for years and years and years, why does a stormtrooper on a random planet have a weapon that is seemingly purposefully designed to battle a lightsaber?
In the new series?
In the new series.
Well, they knew that Jedi were there. I mean, in 8, Luke was training a whole slew of Jedi. Kylo Ren's there. He's a dude with a lightsaber. They know that Luke is out there. If he comes up at any moment, they got to be ready to go. Stormtroopers got to be ready to go. Whip out your batons. Luke's here.
Are you talking about episode 8?
I'm talking about 7 and 8. I'm talking about like the stuff behind it. Like,
because the first time I remember seeing laser baton dude, electric baton guy, was in, I thought, the opening scene of 7.
No, that dude was a different. The backstory they released was, I think it was like 4 people who trained together. Finn was on a team with 3 other dudes.
Okay.
The one dude who died in the beginning of 7 was like Finn's best friend in that group. And so that's what really, when Finn sees him die at the beginning, he's like, I've got to get out of here. This is not for me. And so that dude was the other one, like the real staunch, like military dude in their group. So when Finn leaves, he gets like his feelings hurt because he was like, we trained together. We were like brothers. And now you've just left me because somebody else died. And so that's why he like freaks out on that planet and is like, you're a traitor, and then goes after him and then is easily dispatched.
I'm going to have to do some research and come back to that next week when we talk more in depth about those.
I know. Even before this episode, we were like, let's not go too in depth in sequels. Let's not do this. And now we're like, listen, the backstory of their weapons.
And well, speaking of weapons, in the original trilogy, one thing I've always thought was absolutely hilarious is watching the lightsaber battles in A New Hope, where they're thought of as heavy two-handed weapons. Yeah. It's dink, 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 and then little, I guess, did they realize at the time that you've got Jedi out there using them with 2 hands, 2 lightsabers, saber staffs,
General
double-sided lightsabers.
Not
Grievous
even a
has,
Jedi.
4 or 6?
Yeah, and he's not even a Jedi or a Sith. He just knew how to fight with lightsabers.
I really want to talk about the new movies when you said that, but we won't.
I know exactly the point you want to make. Because okay, no, we'll talk about it next week.
Yep.
God, every time I'm about to go into something.
And, one other thing, too, other than the lightsaber battles in A New Hope, one other thing that I genuinely forgotten about the original trilogy is the gratuitous use of communication through the Force.
Yeah. There's a lot of, hey, Luke, you got to go here through the Force because Luke needed to go there.
Right. And I may want to touch on a little bit, too, that I felt like Obi-Wan got the shaft when he was killed.
Yeah.
Like, not sure what was going on there.
Yeah.
And we can dive into that. But, again, the more I go back and the more I watch the originals, it's almost like the more respect I have, or not, maybe not the more respect, the more I appreciate the decisions that were potentially made in the new movies, too. Mm-hmm. With the Force Ghost, things of that nature. as well as even some things that I would have never realized originally watching the original trilogy, is like the Rebel base on Hoth looks just like the Rebel base at the end of Episode 8.
Yeah.
And it's even all the way down to which I guess it was salt in Episode 8, and then in Episode 5 it was snow, but it was still trenches. It was still the same sort of layout. It's like going back after watching the new movies has allowed me to sort of spot those types of things, even down to like the stairway in Maz's bar where Rey's walking down and she, has the vision, all of that. That stairway looks just like stairways from the sets of 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
And even the shape of the windows and things of that nature is like, these are little things that maybe I'm just now starting to pick up on, because you literally just have to watch those movies so many times to be able to notice that level of detail. But I have higher hopes for what is to come in episode number 9 based off of some of the things that I've seen in the original trilogy that I would have otherwise not given credit to.
Yeah, I can agree with that, and that's kind of brings up the point of like, no matter what you think about 7 or 8, no matter what you think about the story or the characters or anything like that, the people who made it cared. They cared a lot, and they really tried to deliver what they thought we as Star Wars fans wanted. Now, of course, the community's kind of derided, especially more on 8 than 7, but they gave it 100% in literally every aspect.
Even down to, in the originals, Luke goes into the Dark Forest when he's chilling with Yoda, and he has his vision, and then you see something similar with Rey.
Yeah.
Like, it was all of these callbacks that if you would have asked me before the new movies came out, I would have told you that I could quote the original trilogy word for word. And I probably could have gotten you close, but it was just a whole new appreciation rewatching them again.
Yeah, I always kind of have that, especially with all the new movies coming out. I try and rewatch at least 4, 5, 6, and then whatever the new movie is that has come out leading up to the newest one. So watching all of that, and then like watching the new ones, I'm like, like there's a lot of stuff. And that's really interesting because we're going to talk about how the new spin-off movies fit into this entire universe, which have so far only taken place between episode 3 and episode 4. And there's no spin-offs that take place anytime other than that. But speaking of those movies, one of those that I would love to see, and they announced it, but now apparently it's like on hold and stuff like this, is the Obi-Wan Kenobi spinoff.
Right.
Because at the end of 3, he's still Obi-Wan Kenobi. Order 66 has happened. I've got to find the Jedi. I've got to unite the Jedi. Like, I've got to fight. I've got to do this. And then when we see him in 4, he's just old Ben Kenobi.
Right.
And he's like, yep, living on Tatooine. And it's like, what happened to make you like that?
I've been watching after you for your whole life. You know, like that type of stuff.
Yeah, so I'm really interested to see his story because I feel like there's still more to tell with Obi-Wan Kenobi's. And it makes me sad to say, especially because the new movies haven't necessarily touched on it besides the inclusion of Kylo Ren and like the older characters. The Skywalker saga has come to an end for me with Star Wars. I understand that it's always Skywalkers, but like some of the stuff they're coming out with now is like super interesting, and it has nothing to do with the Skywalkers.
Well, that was kind of the point, right?
Yeah, and that's what, like, Rogue One, I loved Rogue One. We'll talk about more next week. But I loved Rogue One specifically for that reason. It is a war movie set in Star Wars.
It is. Yes. That is an excellent way to describe it. It is a gritty war film.
It is Magnificent Seven with Star Wars.
Yes.
It's a bunch of rebels and scum that don't want to be doing this, that have to because they feel like they're going to die otherwise.
So, in a way to talk about the originals, but also talk about all of the other movies in the Star Wars universe, let's talk about some of the things that don't make sense in the originals after having seen all of the other movies, like the fact that Anakin doesn't recognize his own droids.
Yeah, because I even had to like actively search for the answer of why when R2-D2 and C-3PO see Anakin and like Leia and Luke and all the people, they aren't like, oh yeah, Leia and Luke. Like I had to actively search for it at the end of 3.
Well, robots can be can be wiped.
Exactly.
A
And
human
they
brain cannot.
fully wiped C-3PO, but they didn't get to finish their wipe completely with R2-D2, which is why he remembers
Gotcha.
certain things. But yeah, he doesn't recognize his own droids. The fight at the end of Rogue One does not stack up one bit to the next time we see Darth Vader battle in A New Hope with Obi-Wan Kenobi.
No, it doesn't. But even having seen the prequels and Rogue One, I still feel like that big fight between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader was more satisfying after the build up of all of the others.
Do you mean 4 or 3?
4.
You think that fight was satisfying?
I mean, again, dink.
Yeah, they just poked sticks at each other for a little bit, and then Darth Vader swiped him and he disappeared.
But it ended. Okay, now that was not satisfying. That I have always been upset with.
Yes,
is that they did that to my boy Obi-Wan.
I have another theory on that.
Go.
Okay, well, I was gonna wait for you to finish your point. I think because the only people we've seen disappear are like the more powerful people in the Force. Like Qui-Gon Jinn has been shown to be a Force ghost in the Clone Wars series. Mm-hmm. Never saw him disappear. Did we see Yoda disappear?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
can't remember.
This could be after the edits. I don't know. It's been so long since I've seen the originals.
I don't know if he just rolled over and like that was it or what.
He definitely rolls over and closes his eyes, goes out, and then you see him disappear and the blanket falls. But could that have been edited back in when they went back and rearranged all the faces and Force Ghosts? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. Well, I really don't know.
Certainly in the special editions, he disappears.
Yeah. Well, this throws off my entire theory. My original theory was the more powerful people in the Force are the people that we see disappear. All the other Jedis can Force Ghost later, but like their bodies are there. You see their dead bodies.
See, I've always been under the impression that you have to be up to a certain level of mastery with the Force. To be able to even give yourself over and basically give yourself to the Force.
Yeah.
I feel like obviously after Order 66, if everyone who's Force sensitive could be a Force ghost, or every Jedi could do that,
they'd all be running around.
They'd all be running around all over the place. So, gosh, but that also brings up, what about everyone on the council? Where's Mace Windu at,
I have seen something, and it's all because of Samuel L. Jackson that I believe in this theory. And it's kind of what your point was about Palpatine. He's like, we've seen people fall from high places before. All these people out here that think Mace Windu's dead are idiots. And so I've seen somebody pitch a rumored Obi-Wan Kenobi spinoff, which would take place between 3 and 4. And it's Obi-Wan Kenobi teaming up with Mace Windu, who now has a lightsaber inserted into his arm that he can shoot out like Wolverine when he needs to. And you don't like that?
That might be a little much.
Well, he doesn't have hands. He needs something.
Are you kidding me? There are at least 8 arms that get cut off in the total of the Star Wars series, of everything Star Wars.
Yeah, but the Skywalkers can't afford it. Mace Windu can't. The Jedis are gone. He's got to hide as a poor dude now.
I don't know. I don't know about that. Because Mace Windu, what made him special is that he developed his own fighting style. Like, he actually, literally wrote the book for one type of fighting style for the Jedi.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is, aside from the reality, which is that he asked for his lightsaber to be purple so he could pick himself out on screen, which I firmly believe is the actual reason. But how they justify that in the lore is that he was one of the very, very few Jedi that could draw power from more of like what a consular would do. It's sort of the middle ground, the gray area of the Force. He can tap into the dark side and not let it overcome him, which is why he was able to fight in the style that he could. And that's also why his lightsaber was in between blue and red, is because obviously the crystals harmonize better with the side of the Force that you're using. And that's actually why the synthetic red ones, they came up with all that. And we won't go too deep into all that kind of stuff. But if you have a master of the lightsaber to then Wolverine it into his arm, that's taking it a little too far for me.
Okay, now this is like, I would want to see it, But I honestly, in my opinion, if it was just Samuel L. Jackson with like at least, even if he had like robot hands that he could like turn his hand up and like a lightsaber blade popped out of or something, then I'd be like I just see it in the trailer where he's just standing there and they're like, "What are you gonna do? You don't have a weapon." And he's like, "Don't I?" And you just see like out of his arm. I mean, like I just want to see it happen. I just want to freak out and see it happen. But basically, the rumor was like they would get together, try and clean up the mess after Order 66, and it would more or less be like a buddy road trip adventure.
A buddy cop drama.
Yeah, across the galaxy with Obi-Wan Kenobi and handless Mace Windu.
That's awesome.
I would love that movie.
I would love to see the teaser trailer just so I could see it in action, and then for them to say that was a horrible idea. He has a hand again.
He has a hand. But they changed it from teaser trailer to film.
Yeah.
They're like, we made a mistake, you guys. Nope. Apparently nobody liked the lightsaber hand except for one man in Georgia.
He runs a podcast. It's pretty popular.
He runs
you guys
a podcast.
Check it out.
He was really freaking out about it. He's the main reason we put it in there.
So speaking of weaponry, the most underappreciated tool of the Jedi, according to the original trilogy, is the grappling hook. Think about it. So Luke, in episode 4, in the famous scene where he grabs Leia and
kisses
he
his sister
and kisses his sister and swings across the chasm, guess what? He has like a utility belt with a grappling hook in it.
Yeah.
Okay? In episode 5, what does he use to get to the top of the AT-AT to throw the grenade in?
Grappling hook.
A grappling hook. Okay? In episode 6, there is absolutely a use of what could be a grappling hook, but I did not feel comfortable enough adding it to my list. So it was more, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was more like he used a rope to do the job. But either way, most underappreciated tool of the Jedi, got him out of some sticky situations, the grappling hook.
Well, if my theory is correct, of the Force makes the universe tilt in your favor more or less, might not necessarily even be the grappling hook. It might just be whatever object they pick up, and the Force uses itself to help them.
He packed it in his belt. There's literally a scene where Batman's like Batman opens style like a tool belt pouch and pulls out a grappling hook that's nice and wound up. Like he was prepared with a grappling hook.
I know, that's the Force. When he was like good, he was like, I probably don't need a grappling hook. And he just heard that voice in his head that was like, you need it. Trust me. And he went back and grabbed it.
I guess.
He's got a grappling hook in. Although I love all the references and stuff now, which they might have been referencing more like Batman, but like Jay and Silent Bob, and they're like grappling hooks and stuff like that. It's hilarious.
So talking about kissing your sister. When Ben is talking to Yoda.
Yeah.
And he says, that boy's our only hope. And Yoda says, no, there is another.
Mm-hmm.
Is it Leia? I think that it was inferred that it was Leia. But obviously we never see that play out. And it's also inferred very heavily that she is a Force user.
Oh, she 100% is a Force user in episode 8.
When they're talking back and forth, when he's hanging at the bottom of... Oh, episode 8. You're way ahead of me.
Episode 8. Well, I mean, she like ballet dances back to the ship after it's blown up. She 100% is a Force user.
We'll get into that next time. I've got more problems with that. But in episode, whenever they meet Lando and they're in Cloud City and Luke's hanging at the very bottom of the thing in the sky in the clouds, he calls to Leia, and Leia knows enough to. So to me, that sort of infers at the time, all the way back then, that they were familiar with it, or at least they knew that she was a Force user. But you never get to see her fully come into a role of, maybe a Jedi. I don't know if that was ever intended. I would have loved to have seen that, though.
Yeah, I think it more or less goes back to the fact that like a lot of people are Force sensitive and can feel it, but they might not necessarily feel it enough to be trained in it, to be able to like Force push people and like do all this kind of Jedi stuff. But people can like feel the Force. Like there's people that can feel it. And I think Leia's one of the ones that can feel it. And so they definitely inferred that of like, she is our other hope, because that led up to the big twist of like, oh, she's my sister. And it's like, well, you guys kissed twice. I don't know if you planned this out, Lucas, before you started writing, but maybe you should have nixed those kisses. But I think now the way they're going to try and twist it is like the newer episodes with Rey and like all those people was like, oh, that's who I was talking about. Because we never got to see it come to fruition.
But they weren't born when this conversation
The Force has a plan. It knows.
Yeah, but
they
found
Anakin.
Go from Anakin was the chosen one.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. So they knew. They were like, we have a chosen one. It's this dude.
Right.
And then it messed up, and they're like, it's this dude. And then it messed up, and they're like, it's this girl.
Well, if we're talking about Anakin, then we're talking about prequels, which means we're talking about...
Jedi might not be as all-knowing as we were led to believe.
Hang on. What's the M word? It's not mitochondria. That's an actual
midichlorians.
Midichlorians. If we're talking about prequels, then they could have just tested Leia's blood.
I was going to bring that up when I was making this point. The thought went through my head, and I was like, no, because I don't want to give credence to the fact that they put midichlorians in that movie. I don't, because I was going to be like, well, maybe Leia has midichlorians, but just not as much as Luke. But I don't want to give any credence to that.
Well, everyone has squashed the midichlorian thing because my immediate next point that I want to make is if they're twins, then in theory they should be quite level as far as, you know, their ability to tap into the Force. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of little weird things like that they could still play with in the new movies, and there's just
they only got one more. They better hurry up.
Oh, I know. Well. I don't think we're going to be stopping anytime.
Well, I think that the sagas will be finished. I think the episodes of Star Wars will be done when 9 comes out. The spin-off movies and stuff, I don't think are ever going to stop. I think there's going to keep coming and coming. And whether it's like new trilogies, Knights of the Old Republic, stuff like that, they're going to keep coming no matter what.
Yeah, I would love to see a Knights of the Old Republic trilogy. I would love to see any trilogy other than the prequels where the Jedi are just in their prime.
Yeah.
You know?
I can't wait for Rogue 2.
Oh, that's a thing?
No.
I was about to say.
Have you seen Rogue One?
Yeah.
Although
there's not a whole lot of room to play with there.
I do have an interesting theory, and if you want me to... Well, it's not a theory, really. It's just like a fan idea I came up with.
What you got?
And if we should save it, because it ties into Rogue One, but it also ties into the original trilogy. So if we should save it, then we will for next week.
That's up to you, man.
All right, well, you made this real awkward. I guess I'll just go ahead and talk about it. So my fan thing that I had come up with, because going into Rogue One, I was like, that chick's Rey's mom. I know she is. There's only one other British girl in the galaxy, and it's Rey. So now you're telling me that there's two? That's her mom. And at the same time, like, everything was coming out with Luke and stuff like that. And then, of course, at the end of Rogue One, everybody dies.
Right.
This whole theory spawned off of the fact that in Rogue One, they keep mentioning Kyber Crystal, Kyber Crystal, Kyber Crystal, Kyber Crystal. Nothing ever comes of it. Nothing ever comes of the fact that she has this crystal around her neck. But they mention it all the time. But it never comes to fruition. So my fan story was that when that blast happens, it cuts us out. We don't see it, but that Kyber Crystal, she's Force sensitive, but she doesn't know how to use it yet. So the Kyber Crystal amplifies her Force sensitiveness, and it basically creates a force field around her with the blast. And so she's like holding that dude. He's cool because he's being held, and she's like, oh my God, I don't know what's happening, whatever. Planet, like another part of it blows up. It shakes. He falls out of the Force ball, and she watches him burn in front of her. So she is in the hospital, more or less, like recovering from her injuries. Luke is coming in to visit his friends. This is post 4. And she is mad at Luke for stealing all the credit that her dad deserves. Because he's the one who got the plans to the Death Star to them. But Luke's like, oh, you blew it up, blah, 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 blah. And so she comes up to him. She's been at the hospital. She's lost all of her friends. She starts freaking out. And she's like, you're the dude. You're the reason all my friends are dead. And you're just taking all this credit, blah, blah, blah. Luke, instead of being like, oh my God, whatever, get out of my face, is like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. He comes and starts visiting her. They fall in love.
Make a baby and it's Rey. And she's a Skywalker!
Exactly my point.
Yep.
But the movie based off of that, and the Kyber Crystal around her neck, The reason Luke never tells anybody about it is because he knows that that's his true way to the dark side. Is if somebody finds out about her and threatens her life, he will use the dark side to kill them to save her life. So he never tells anybody about it. She, with the kyber crystal around her neck, when Luke loses his lightsaber in 5, takes her kyber crystal off. That's how he makes his new lightsaber, and it's green. So he's carrying her into battle every time he goes into battle with his new lightsaber. But we never hear about that fact. Han knew about her. That's why in 7, when Maz Kanata's handing him the lightsaber, he's like, where did you find this? She's like, that's a story for another time. Because my movie is called Kyber, a Star Wars story. And it's about Maz Kanata finding out that who ends up being Snoke has the lightsaber. And she's like, with a lightsaber this powerful, that was known from like this powerful of a Jedi, he could turn the tides very easily. So Luke is off somewhere. So Jin goes to Jakku, drops Rey off with Unkar Plot from episode 7. And so that's the ship we see flying away in Rey's vision in 7, is Jin leaving her daughter there so she can go get the lightsaber and stuff. And then she ends up passing away in that one. Or there's something happens with the Force that says, if you find Rey, if you go back for Rey, all of this stuff will happen and Rey's gonna die basically, and like stuff like that. So she ends up not going back for Rey, leaving her to live her quiet life on Jakku. And so that's my whole theory fan story that ties it all together. There's like 5 minutes.
There's absolutely nothing that would make me more happy than to find out that Rey is a Skywalker.
I know, I would love that. And see, and I came up with the perfect story to tie it all together.
That's great. And you know, you bring up another point, and this goes back to what we were talking about last week too, is like my really deep interest in a lot of these worlds and weapons, is that you never see in the movies really the crafting of a lightsaber. Exactly. Now, you understand the story. We've, at least I, and I'm sure you have played all the video games where you actually do go through, you know, as part of your training to sort of wrap it up. You go to the crystal that calls you and you mine it and you craft it and all of this. Mm-hmm. And I feel like to see that in an official canon Star Wars movie would just be so awesome. Yeah. So awesome.
And that, but I don't think we're ever necessarily going to get it because there's one Jedi remaining and she's got one.
Now, this is something that I don't know the answer to, and I fully admit that I'm not as caught up on the EU as I probably should be. But were every single Jedi really taken out in Order 66? Could there not be any others in hiding? Could we not have a resurgence of some sort?
No, yeah, and that they kind of touch on that at the end of 8, and that also goes back to my theory. Everything ties into this theory of that the Force is in a lot of people. They just don't know how to harness it and use it yet. So that little like dude that we see at the end of 8 that grabs the broom with the Force clearly is Force sensitive. And he could be a great Jedi, but he just doesn't have the training or anything.
You mean the kid that was left when they saved the horse?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, we'll talk about that next week.
That kid. But yeah, I mean, I think that the Force is in a lot of people, but the main part that they took down with the Jedi Order was the trainings and education that the Jedi get.
It was the Jedi Order. It was the the ones at the temple. And
it's like if we got rid of police, there'd still be dudes running around with guns ready to shoot people and stuff like that. Yeah. But like the police need their training, like the Jedi do. Anybody can run around and try and stop crime. It takes the education stuff to become a Jedi.
That makes sense.
Is what I think.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and we see that thoroughly in the original trilogy. I mean, look what happens when, or what could have potentially happened if Luke would have just stuck around and finished his training. Yeah. We would have a totally different story. Yeah. And
that also kind of goes into the fact of like, that kid probably has no idea what the Force is. Nobody's ever come to him and been like, you have the Force. Because they don't know what it is.
Well, even in episode 4...
they kill it.
I mean, yeah, and even in episode 4, it was like... they refer to it as wizards and like old religions and things of that nature.
In 7, they were like Jedi, the Force, like they've made it up to be like urban legends and myths. And Han Solo has to tell them it's true.
Exactly.
All of this is true. They just have heard like, oh yeah, we know that like this war happened and they blew up the Death Star. But like whether Jedi and lightsabers and the Force is all true, they're like, I think that's myth. So they've all been led to believe that fact that the Jedi might not have ever even existed. They're just made up Greek gods.
Right. Wow. So one
out of breath on that thought.
Yeah, I know. And you know, I do want to loop back around to this too, because I thought this was a very interesting point that one of my good buddies brought up. When you see the final battle between Vader, Luke, Palpatine, Luke, the whole saga up until that point is light side versus dark side, light side versus dark side. And I feel like we see Luke harness the power of the dark side to do what he does at the exact same time as you see Vader starting to realize the light side again, almost sort of in your reciprocity idea that you mentioned earlier, where things balance each other out.
The Force makes the balance.
Yeah, the Force makes the balance. So when Luke embraces that darker side to become as powerful as he needs to be in the moment to live, you see that swap come out in Vader. And I always thought that was very interesting that you see him harness sort of the dark side a little bit.
Yeah.
That was very intriguing to me, and I never really thought through it, so I wanted to bring it up to you.
Yeah, I agree. There's something in the extended universe called the Gray Jedi.
Right.
And that is the perfect balance between good and evil. They fight to balance the Force.
Right.
So I honestly would say they're more like maybe like an anti-hero in some aspects, because they do good stuff, keep the balance of the Force, but they also do bad stuff to keep the balance of the Force. It's all about making sure like everyone else is good, like life is balanced. So they're not necessarily good or bad. They're just like, whatever needs to be done, I'll do it. And so I think they touched on that a little bit with like Luke and Vader and like tempting with the dark side and like doing all that kind of stuff. So I think, and that seems to be the way they're going in the new series with Rey and Kylo are going to balance each other out, kind of the way Luke and Vader did. And I think honestly that's going to be like the wrap up is like, here are the first Gray Jedis. They've actually brought balance, because they touched on it, but they never like fully stated that fact. And I think that one little non-statement opened up the road for the sequels. That they didn't just openly state Luke can harness both.
Right. And I think it is a skill of a trained Jedi, potentially, to be able to harness that when it's necessary. To be able to maybe not specialize in it, but understand that you can tap into it if necessary.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to the saga overall, which is interesting, what we were just talking about. I was just thinking about this as you were talking. The fact that they don't have that education anymore of people saying, like, you can't go to the dark side. Only light. You can't, like, they don't have the education and, like, all this stuff to know of, like, the balance and, like, all that stuff.
Well, there's even the comment to Rey where Luke is like, you ran towards the dark.
Yeah. And so I think that's interesting, and that downfall that we see in episode 3 is kind of setting up for the Gray Jedi and the new series. Like, they had to have that downfall to get rid of the education and the establishment and the you have to be good all the time. You can never harness the darkness. So, like, they kind of start twisting it in the originals, and then now they're, like, cranking it to 11 in the sequel series.
Yeah, instead of it being a temptation that will slowly consume you and turn you into a horrible being, they use it now more as a tool.
Yeah.
I guess.
And I mean, we've only ever seen people besides Luke and like some of those people, to our knowledge, that are either light or dark. You're good or you're bad. You harness the good side, you harness the bad side. Which one are you? So to see that like balance kind of with Luke and Vader, and then eventually probably in this series, I think it's going to be really interesting and something that they've been setting up seemingly since the beginning without saying anything about it.
Well, I would say that definitely all of the Jedi from the prequels were quote unquote good.
Yeah.
You know, light-sided Jedi.
I agree.
And in that, at the time, is in the lore is what makes Mace Windu so awesome, is that he can pull from both. So that was kind of his special thing. Now, there could have obviously been others that were like him that I'm just not recalling at the moment. But
that's what I'm saying, like, to our knowledge.
Right.
They could come out with any kind of story that's like, oh, yeah, Obi-Wan's been doing it since the beginning. And we're like, what?
Yeah.
Like, they could come out with anything. I think I just spit on you, so I apologize.
Oh, it's all good. We're really close to the mic.
We are really close to the mic because the first episode was quiet, so we're sorry about that.
So is there anything that we haven't covered that you just absolutely wanted to talk about?
Oh my gosh, no, I think we covered even more than we were supposed to. We talked about the sequel series and the prequel series a lot.
But we have by no means
dove into it. That's why I think next week is going to be very interesting because, a little bit of setup here, I am of the belief that anytime a new Star Wars movie comes out, it's a new story, it's a new chance. Whatever I thought of the previous one doesn't matter. I love Star Wars, gotta go see the new one. So I have seen Solo already, was there opening weekend, all this stuff. But John Crocker, on the other hand,
have not. And we touched on this a little bit in the last episode as well. And I'm with you. I like to think of myself as a positive person that anytime there's a new movie that comes out, I give it a chance and I want to see it. But they did us so wrong in episode 8.
Which is something we will talk about.
Yeah.
And so the cinch pin in all of this is going to be Crocker watching Solo for the first time, my rewatching it, and coming in fresh with those opinions on what now we think of Solo, the first movie that come out after episode 8, which is, argumentatively, probably the most divided opinion on a Star Wars movie of all time.
Now, I have not seen Solo, so this could totally just be an irrelevant comment, but do you think they're going to go back and add the dice to all the movies in the Millennium Falcon? Talking about post-production editing.
Now this is something interesting that we'll talk more about. They set Solo up for a sequel, for what would be Solo 2.
Okay.
But how it performed, I don't know if we're ever going to get that. So that's also going to be interesting to talk about. So next week, if you enjoyed this episode, I can't even imagine what you're going to think about next week. Because it's going to be off the rails.
For real, it might be a 3-hour-long conversation.
This has just been us, like, fluffing up Star Wars and this and that. And we talked, like, negatively once. And then so now I think next week's going to be like, okay, so we got through the positive stuff. Now let's get to some of the stuff we need to change.
Yeah. Which, again, and we mentioned this last week too, it doesn't matter what they do. At the end of the day, it's the Star Wars universe. If you love it as much as we do, you're going to watch it. You're going to give it its due.
Yeah.
But to be fans at the level we are, I feel like we have the ability to dive into those types of conversations.
Well, the entire reason we're so passionate about it in the first place is because we care so much about this franchise.
Yes.
If we didn't care and didn't like the movie, we'd be like, whatever.
Exactly.
But now we're like, we've got opinions. We got to get this fixed. We got to do this, and this. We'll get it worked out. So there's like all this stuff now because we're so passionate that comes to mind. So by us saying negative things, it's only because we love it so much. We're like caring parents.
Exactly.
We're concerned parents. We want to see our baby succeed.
Our little Skywalker Rey
not be boycotted by a bunch of people who hated the movie before.
All right.
Well, yeah, I guess that's it. I'm super excited for next week. I think it's going to be an awesome episode. Thank you guys for tuning in once again. Hopefully this audio is a little bit louder. You don't hear me breathing into the mic so much. I know I have a tendency to breathe loud when I'm behind the scenes and not paying attention. So hopefully I'm not breathing too loud this entire episode. Give us a like, comment, subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at Scruffy Movies.
Crocalicious
on Instagram. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you all next week.
Bye.
You can do that, everyone.
Huh.
What?